The history of Islam, spanning from the birth of its prophet Muhammad (PBUH) in 570 CE to the fall of Constantinople in 1453 CE, is not just a story of conquests, battles, and dynasties. It is a journey of spiritual awakening, a transformation of hearts, and the rise of a civilization that would forever change the course of humanity. This era of over 800 years is one of the most profound and spiritually significant periods in human history, filled with moments of extraordinary faith, perseverance, wisdom, and sacrifice. Today, we are embarking on a deep dive into this era that witnessed the rise of Islam from a small, persecuted community in the deserts of Arabia to a vast, powerful empire stretching from Spain in the west to India in the east. Let us begin by understanding what Islam truly is, not just as a religion, but as a guiding force that shaped the lives of millions and continues to shape the hearts and minds of billions. At its core, Islam is a message of surrender and submission to the One, the Creator of the heavens and the earth. The Arabic word Islam itself comes from the root word SLM, which means peace and submission. To be a Muslim is to submit to the will of Allah, the one true God. It is a submission that brings peace to the heart, tranquility to the soul, and harmony to the individual and society. This message is simple yet profoundly deep, rooted in the belief that there is no God but Allah and Muhammad, PBUH, is his final messenger. The message of Islam is universal, transcending borders, time, and culture. It emphasizes the unity of God, Tawheed, the finality of prophethood in Muhammad, PBUH, the importance of divine revelation, and the need for social justice, kindness, and compassion. In the heart of every Muslim lies the sacred teachings of the Quran, the word of Allah, which offers guidance for every aspect of life, from personal conduct to societal responsibilities. As we reflect on this simple yet powerful message, we are reminded of the profound depth of the guidance provided to humanity. For the early followers of Islam, it was not just a message they heard, it was a message that transformed their lives, challenged their beliefs, and called them to action. In those early years, as the Prophet Muhammad, PBUH, began to preach, the message was not one of mere words, it was a radical call to change. It was a call to leave behind the old ways of tribalism, injustice, and polytheism, and embrace a new way of life based on justice, equality, and faith in the unseen. The early Muslims faced persecution, ostracism, and unimaginable hardships. They were tortured, boycotted, and forced to flee their homes, but despite the oppression, their faith never wavered. They held on to the belief that there was something greater at stake, a divine purpose that would, in time, transform the world, and it did. When we speak of the period between 570 CE and 1453 CE in Islamic history, we are speaking of more than just the dates on a timeline. This was the time when the foundations of a global civilization were laid, a civilization that was to become a beacon of knowledge, justice, and cultural exchange. The year 570 CE marks the birth of the Prophet Muhammad, PBUH, in Mecca, a city in the Arabian Peninsula, which at the time was a place of idol worship and tribal conflict. It was a time when people lived in ignorance, jahiliyyah, worshipping idols and living lives dictated by their tribal allegiances. But from this seemingly humble beginning, a message would emerge that would challenge the very core of human existence. This was the beginning of an extraordinary journey, not just for the Prophet PBUH, but for the entire world. In the early days, Islam faced intense opposition. The first revelations came as a divine whisper in the cave of Hijra, and the Prophet Muhammad PBUH was instructed to read Iqra. These first words marked the beginning of a revolution that would soon engulf the Arabian Peninsula and beyond. For many, this message was a challenge. It called them to abandon their old ways, to reject the idols they had worshipped, and to submit only to the one true God. The early Muslims faced persecution, ostracism, and unimaginable hardships. They were tortured, boycotted, and forced to flee their homes, but despite the oppression, their faith never wavered. They held on to the belief that there was something greater at stake, a divine purpose that would, in time, transform the world, and it did. The life of Prophet Muhammad (PBUH) is a beacon of hope, an example of patience, humility, and unwavering trust in Allah. His life was not one of ease, but of struggle, sacrifice, and endurance. As the first messenger of Islam, his task was not just to deliver a message, but to live that message and embody the very principles of justice, mercy, and compassion that Islam advocates. In his early life, Muhammad (PBUH) faced many trials, yet he remained steadfast. Born into the Quraysh tribe, orphaned at a young age, and raised under the care of his grandfather and later his uncle, Muhammad (PBUH) faced many hardships. But it was during these formative years that his character began to shine. Known as Al-Amin, the trustworthy, he gained the respect and admiration of those around him. His marriage to Khadija, a wealthy and noble woman of Mecca, marked the beginning of a partnership built on love, trust, and shared faith. When the first revelation came, it was a moment of profound significance, not just for the Prophet Muhammad (PBUH), but for all of humanity. He was called to bring a message that would challenge the societal norms of his time, a message that would call people to monotheism, to social justice, and to the belief in the Day of Judgment. It was a message that would not only change the lives of the people of Arabia, but would eventually transform the world. The early days were filled with hardship, and yet the Prophet's PBUH faith remained unshaken. The struggles faced by the early Muslims are a powerful reminder of the strength that comes from trusting in Allah. As we reflect on their perseverance, we too are called to endure in the face of adversity. The early Muslims faced hardships that tested their very will to live, but they did not give up. Instead, they clung to their faith, knowing that Allah's promise of victory was certain. The events of the early history of Islam were not just political or social. They were deeply spiritual and emotional experiences for the people involved. When we look at the lives of the Prophet Muhammad (PBUH) and his companions, we see men and women who, despite their challenges, held on to their faith with all their hearts. They believed in something greater than themselves, and this belief was what sustained them in the face of persecution, hardship, and loss. For the Muslims of that time, their faith was not just a belief, it was a way of life. The Quran provided them with guidance, and the example of the Prophet Muhammad (PBUH) showed them how to live that guidance every day. Their emotional connection to their faith was palpable. They were not just followers of a religion, they were part of a movement, a spiritual revolution that would change the world. As we reflect on these early days, we are called to ask ourselves, what does our faith mean to us? How deeply are we connected to the message of Islam? When faced with trials and hardships, do we hold on to our faith with the same strength and conviction that the early Muslims did? And how can we, in our own lives, embody the teachings of Islam just as the Prophet Muhammad (PBUH) and his companions did? The history of Islam from 570 to 1453 is a story of faith, resilience, and transformation. It is the story of a message that began with one man in a small cave in Mecca, and over time spread across the world, shaping civilizations, cultures, and hearts. It is the story of a community that, despite the many trials and challenges, never gave up on their belief in the one true God. As we reflect on the early days of Islam, we are reminded of the spiritual strength and courage that can arise when we surrender ourselves fully to Allah. We are reminded that the challenges we face in life are but a test of our faith, and that, just as the early Muslims overcame their struggles, so too can we overcome ours. This is a message of hope, a message that tells us that no matter the difficulties we may face, if we place our trust in Allah, we too can find peace, strength, and resilience. In the journey of your life, how can you draw closer to the legacy of the Prophet Muhammad (PBUH) and the early Muslims? And how can you embody the qualities of patience, perseverance, and trust in Allah? The year 570 CE marks a moment in history that would forever alter the course of human civilization. In the bustling city of Mecca, nestled in the heart of the Arabian Peninsula, a child was born who would not only shape the future of his people, but also guide the world towards a path of justice, unity, and divine purpose. This child, Muhammad PBUH, was born into a world that was spiritually fragmented, culturally rich, yet deeply entrenched in the practices of idol worship and tribal divisions. In the early hours of his life, Muhammad PBUH was destined to face many trials. His father Abdullah passed away before he was born, and his mother Amina followed shortly after when he was just 6 years old. Orphaned, Muhammad PBUH found himself under the care of his grandfather, Abdul Muttalib, and later, his uncle, Abu Talib. The death of his parents left a deep imprint on the young heart of Muhammad PBUH, a sense of loss that would echo throughout his life. But it also forged a profound connection with the Creator, a deep yearning for understanding the greater purpose of life. He grew up in a world that was at once harsh and beautiful, Mecca, a place where merchants and pilgrims gathered, and where the Kaaba stood as the focal point of the city. Revered by many, but surrounded by the pagan practices of idol worship. Mecca was not just a commercial hub, it was a spiritual crossroads, where people from all tribes and cultures would converge to perform rituals in honor of their idols. Yet amidst this polytheism, a man would rise who would shatter these conventions. Muhammad PBUH grew up surrounded by the hum of trade, the sounds of busy merchants, the deep reverence for the Kaaba, yet his heart longed for something more, something purer. Something more meaningful than the transient wealth and superficial piety surrounding him. It was in this context, in this world of conflicting values and spiritual yearning, that Muhammad PBUH emerged, a man of unparalleled honesty, integrity, and wisdom. Even as a young boy, he was known for his truthfulness and reliability. People in Mecca called him Al-Amin, the trustworthy. As he matured, it was no surprise that a woman of great stature, Khadija, who was both wealthy and wise, would come to recognize his character. She saw in him a man of exceptional moral standing, someone who had the potential to lead with justice and compassion. Khadija, a widow and a successful businesswoman, had heard of Muhammad's PBUH reputation, and when she sought a trustworthy individual to manage a business trip for her, she turned to him. His honesty in dealing with her business earned him her respect, and soon, Khadija proposed marriage to him. At the age of 25, Muhammad PBUH entered into a union with Khadija, who was 15 years his senior. This marriage was not only one of mutual respect and love, but also one that would play a pivotal role in the early days of Islam. Khadija, a woman of immense wisdom and stature, became Muhammad's PBUH most steadfast supporter. She was the first person to embrace his message when he received the first revelation from Allah. The early years of their marriage were filled with a sense of serenity and understanding. Muhammad PBUH often withdrew from the hustle and bustle of Meccan life to meditate in the cave of Hijra, a place on the mountain of Jabal al-Nur, just outside of the city. It was in this solitary retreat, away from the distractions of the world, that the profound moment of the first revelation took place. It was here, in the stillness of the cave, that the angel Jibril Gabriel appeared to Muhammad PBUH with the divine command, "Read. In the name of your Lord who created." Quran 96:1. The message was clear and momentous. The first words of the Quran to be revealed were not complex or lengthy. They were simple, yet they carried an ocean of meaning. The command to read or recite opened the door to a flood of divine wisdom that would continue to pour into the heart of Muhammad PBUH over the next 23 years. But in that moment, as the angel's words echoed through the cave, Muhammad PBUH was overwhelmed by fear and confusion. He felt as though the weight of the heavens had descended upon him. His body trembled and his mind raced. The first encounter with divine revelation was not a peaceful, serene moment. It was a powerful, intense, and life-altering experience. Rushing back to Khadija, his heart pounding with fear and uncertainty, he told her what had happened. Cover me," he exclaimed as the weight of what he had just experienced sank in. It was Khadija who comforted him in his moment of doubts. She reassured him, telling him that Allah would never abandon someone of his character and integrity. Khadija took him to a Christian cousin, Waraka ibn Nawfal, who confirmed that the message Muhammad PBUH had received was from Allah. the same divine revelation that had been sent to the prophets before him. And so the prophethood began, but the journey was not easy. The initial reaction to the revelation was one of doubt, fear, and confusion. The people of Mecca, steeped in their idol worship and their old ways, rejected the message. Muhammad, PBUH, faced ridicule, hostility, and mockery from his own tribe, the Quraysh. Yet through all this, his faith never wavered. Khadija remained his unwavering supporter, providing him with love, wisdom, and comfort as the weight of the divine message pressed upon him. The early revelations continued, and with each one, Muhammad, PBUH, grew in wisdom and understanding. These revelations, though met with resistance by many in Mecca, began to shape the very core of the Islamic message. They were not just words on paper, they were a call to action, a call to justice, to mercy, to the worship of the one true God, and to a life of humility and compassion. As we reflect on these early moments, it is important to ask ourselves, what would we have done in Muhammad's PBUH place? When faced with the overwhelming weight of responsibility, would we have persevered with the same unwavering trust in Allah? When faced with rejection and hardship, would we have clung to our faith with the same resilience? The lessons of these early years are profound. They remind us that even in our darkest moments, when the world seems uncertain and our hearts tremble, there is a source of strength that transcends fear, a strength that comes from placing our trust in Allah, just as Muhammad, PBUH, did. In our own lives, we may not receive divine revelation in the same way, but we are called to follow the example of Muhammad, PBA, to trust in Allah's plan, to seek knowledge, to be patient in the face of adversity, and to stand firm in our beliefs, even when the world around us may not understand or accept us. Reflecting on this, let us ask ourselves, how do we respond to the challenges in our own lives? Do we turn to Allah in our moments of fear, doubt, or uncertainty? And do we trust in His wisdom and plan, even when the path ahead seems unclear? These questions invite us to reflect on the depth of our faith and to draw closer to the timeless example set by Muhammad, PBUH. In the year 610 CE, in the heart of Mecca, a simple yet profound message began to echo through the streets of a city that had long been divided by idols, social injustice, and tribal conflict. Muhammad, PBUH, who had once been known as Al-Amin, the Trustworthy, now stood as the bearer of a message that would challenge the very fabric of society. This was not a message of war or division, but of monotheism, the belief in the one true God, Allah, and a call for social justice, equality, and moral integrity. For over 2 decades, Muhammad, PBUH, would endure the harshest opposition, ridicule, and persecution. The Quraysh, the powerful tribe that controlled Mecca, saw his message as a threat to their status, their wealth, and their deeply entrenched idol worship. Yet despite their relentless efforts to silence him, Muhammad, PBUH, continued to speak with unwavering resolve, proclaiming the oneness of Allah and urging the people to abandon the worship of false gods. His message was simple: there is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. But it was a message that, if embraced, would transform lives, societies, and ultimately, the world. The early Muslims, a small but growing community, believed in this message with all their hearts. They saw in it a path to spiritual freedom, a call to break free from the chains of tribalism, inequality, and oppression. They were not just followers of a new religion, they were witnesses to the dawn of a new era, one that would redefine humanity's understanding of justice, compassion, and faith. But the path to this new dawn was not easy. As the number of Muhammad's PBUH followers grew, so did the opposition. The Quraysh, in their fear of losing power, began to intensify their persecution of the early Muslims. The streets of Mecca, once filled with the sounds of trade and pilgrimage, were now alive with the cries of those who suffered for their faith. They were beaten, tortured, and ostracized by their families and tribes. The rich and powerful, like Abu Jahl and Abu Lahab, used their influence to try and crush the growing movement. The persecution was relentless, and yet the faith of the early Muslims only grew stronger. In the face of this mounting hostility, the Prophet, PBUH, did not call for violence. Instead, he showed his followers the way of patience, perseverance, and prayer. The early Muslims were taught that their trials were not a sign of Allah's displeasure, but rather a test of their faith, a chance to purify their hearts and strengthen their resolve. As the oppression continued, a new chapter began to unfold. In the year 615 CE, a group of early Muslims seeking refuge from the brutal treatment they faced in Mecca made the difficult decision to migrate to Abyssinia. There, they found solace under the protection of the Christian king, Negus, who recognized the sincerity of their faith and granted them asylum. This migration was a pivotal moment in the early days of Islam, not only because it offered the Muslims a safe haven, but also because it demonstrated the universal nature of Islam. A Christian king, a man from a different faith tradition, provided refuge for the Muslims, showing that the values of justice, mercy, and protection for the oppressed transcended religious boundaries. But even as the Muslims found safety in Abyssinia, the hardships in Mecca continued. The Quraysh were relentless in their efforts to stop the spread of Islam. They even attempted to undermine the early community by offering the Prophet PBUH a bribe, offering him wealth, status, and even leadership in exchange for abandoning his message. Yet the Prophet PBUH stood firm. He had been entrusted with a mission that was far greater than worldly power or riches. His vision was of a world where justice, equality, and faith in the one true God prevailed. In 620 CE, Muhammad PBUH was granted a miraculous spiritual journey that would further solidify his resolve. The event known as Isra and Miraj, or the Night Journey and Ascension, was a profound experience that took Muhammad PBUH from the Kaaba in Mecca to the farthest mosque in Jerusalem, and then through the seven heavens to the very presence of Allah. During this journey, Muhammad PBUH received divine guidance and was granted the gift of the 5 daily prayers, Salah, which would become the foundation of the Muslims' connection with Allah. The Isra and Miraj was not just a physical journey, but a spiritual one. It was a reminder that no matter how difficult the path may seem, the ultimate goal is to draw closer to Allah. It was a reminder of the boundless mercy and greatness of Allah, and a reassurance that, despite the trials of this world, there was a higher purpose to which every Muslim was called. The experience reaffirmed Muhammad's PBUH mission and reminded him that his struggles were part of a greater plan, a plan that would ultimately lead to the triumph of truth. As the persecution in Mecca continued, it became clear that the Prophet PBUH and his followers could not remain in the city indefinitely. The situation grew increasingly dire, and the safety of the community was at risk. It was during this period of intense hardship that Allah, in His infinite wisdom, instructed the Prophet PBUH to prepare for migration. The Hijra, the migration from Mecca to Medina, would mark the turning point in the history of Islam. In 622 CE, Muhammad PBUH and his companions left Mecca, a city that had been their home, to seek refuge in Medina. A city that would become the center of the Muslim community and the heart of the Islamic State. The Hijra was not just a physical migration, it was a spiritual and social transformation. It marked the beginning of the Islamic calendar and the establishment of a community bound by faith, rather than by tribal affiliations. In Medina, Muhammad PBUH was not just a religious leader. He became a statesman, a judge, and a leader who would guide the Muslims in every aspect of their lives. The city of Medina became a sanctuary for the early Muslims, a place where they could practice their faith freely, establish justice, and build a society based on the teachings of Islam. The migration to Medina was not without its challenges. It was a journey fraught with danger as the Quraysh sought to prevent the Muslims from leaving Mecca. But with Allah's guidance, the Muslims made the journey safely, and the message of Islam began to spread with greater strength and determination. The Hijra was the turning point, a moment when Islam went from being a persecuted faith to a thriving community. It was the beginning of the end of the oppression and the start of a new chapter in Islamic history, one that would eventually lead to the establishment of an Islamic empire. As we reflect on the early days of the Prophet's PBUH mission, we are reminded of the trials and sacrifices that shaped the Muslim community. The persecution they endured, the hardship they faced, and the perseverance they showed are all lessons for us today. In our own lives, we may not face the same level of persecution, but we too face challenges and trials that test our faith. The early Muslims teach us that no matter the difficulty, we must hold fast to our beliefs, trust in Allah's plan, and remain patient in the face of adversity. The Hijra, the night journey, and the early migration to Medina were all pivotal moments in the history of Islam. They remind us that the path to success and spiritual fulfillment is not always easy, but it is always worth it. The early Muslims showed us that no matter the obstacles, with faith in Allah, perseverance, and trust in His wisdom, we can overcome anything. As you reflect on these events, ask yourself, how do you respond to the challenges in your own life? When faced with difficulties, do you hold fast to your faith as the early Muslims did? And how can you draw strength from their example to navigate the trials and tribulations of your own journey? The answers to these questions lie within your heart, and the lessons of early Islam offer timeless guidance for us all. The migration of Prophet Muhammad, PBUH, and the early Muslims from Mecca to Medina in 622 CE was not just a physical relocation. It marked the beginning of the establishment of an Islamic state. For over a decade, the city of Medina would serve as the foundation upon which the early Islamic community would rise, face tremendous trials, and forge a path toward the eventual triumph of Islam. This was a time of transformation, a time of building, defending, and establishing a just society, guided by divine revelation. Upon their arrival in Medina, the first challenge Muhammad, PBUH, faced was the need to create a cohesive community out of a society that was diverse, divided, and often at odds with one another. Medina, unlike Mecca, was not a single unified tribe but a mix of different groups, including the Aws and Khazraj tribes, the Jewish tribes, and a small group of Muslims who had already settled there. The Prophet's first task was to bring these groups together, to unite them under the banner of a single faith and a shared vision. It was not just a political challenge but a spiritual one. How could such a fractured society be healed and transformed into a community that lived by the principles of justice, compassion, and mutual support? The solution came in the form of the Constitution of Medina, a groundbreaking document that set out the rights and responsibilities of the different groups within the city. This document, drafted by Prophet Muhammad, PBUH, established the Islamic State not just as a political entity, but as a social contract based on mutual respect, cooperation, and justice. For the first time, the Muslims, the Jews, and the other tribes of Medina were bound together by a common law, one that upheld the rights of individuals and protected the community as a whole. The Constitution of Medina was revolutionary. It recognized the diversity of the city and created a framework that allowed different religious and social groups to coexist peacefully under a common set of rules. It ensured the protection of the rights of minorities and emphasized the importance of justice, fairness, and compassion. It was a document that embodied the spirit of Islam: unity in diversity, peace through understanding, and justice for all. As the Muslim community began to solidify in Medina, it soon became clear that the Quraysh in Mecca, who had long resisted the message of Islam, would not sit idly by. The Prophet's PBUH mission threatened their very way of life, and they saw Islam as a challenge to their power and authority. Their response was swift and harsh. They sought to undermine the growing Muslim community, launching a series of attacks on Medina and its people. But the Prophet PBUH was resolute, and the Muslims stood firm, knowing that they were not just defending themselves, they were defending a divine mission. It was during this period of tension and conflict that some of the most significant battles in Islamic history took place: the Battle of Badr, the Battle of Uhud, and the Battle of the Trench. Each battle carried profound lessons, not just for the early Muslims, but for all of us today. The Battle of Badr, fought in 624 CE, was a defining moment in the history of Islam. The Muslims, greatly outnumbered and with limited resources, faced the might of the Quraysh army. On the eve of battle, the Muslims were filled with fear and uncertainty. They had only a small, makeshift army, and their chances of victory seemed slim. But Muhammad PBUH reminded them that victory did not depend on numbers or material strength, it depended on their faith in Allah. As the battle unfolded, the Muslims fought with courage and conviction. It was not just a battle of swords and shields, it was a battle of hearts and minds. The outcome of Badr was nothing short of miraculous. Despite being vastly outnumbered, the Muslims triumphed and the Quraysh were forced to retreat. This victory was a turning point for Islam. It showed the world that with faith, determination, and trust in Allah, even the most seemingly impossible challenges could be overcome. But the victories in battle did not come without sacrifice. The Battle of Uhud, fought just a year later in 625 CE, would test the resolve of the Muslim community in ways that Badr had not. The Muslims, once again facing the Quraysh, fought fiercely, but this time the outcome was different. Despite initially gaining the upper hand, the Muslims suffered a setback when some of the archers, disobeying the orders of the Prophet PBUH, abandoned their posts on the hill, allowing the Quraysh to attack from behind. The Muslims were caught off guard, and the battle turned in favor of the Quraysh. Many were injured, and several prominent companions of the Prophet PBUH were martyred, including the beloved Hamza, the Prophet's PBUH uncle. The emotional weight of Uhud was immense. The loss of Hamza and others was a deep blow to the Muslims, and the pain of the battle weighed heavily on their hearts. Yet, despite the setback, the Muslims refused to be disheartened. The lessons of Uhud were profound. Victory is not guaranteed, and the path of faith is often fraught with trials. But even in the face of loss and hardship, Muslims were reminded that Allah's plan was greater than their understanding, and that every trial was an opportunity for spiritual growth and reflection. The Battle of the Trench, fought in 627 CE, was another defining moment in the early years of Islam. The Quraysh, along with their allies, laid siege to Medina, hoping to crush the Muslim community once and for all. But the Muslims, led by the Prophet PBUH, had a different strategy. They dug a trench around the city, creating a formidable barrier that the Quraysh could not penetrate. For weeks, the two sides stood facing each other, neither able to gain the upper hand. The siege tested the patience and resilience of the Muslims, but it also demonstrated the power of strategic thinking and unity in the face of adversity. The eventual lifting of the siege was a moment of triumph for the Muslims, and it signaled a shift in the balance of power. It showed the Quraysh that the Muslims were not to be defeated by force alone, that the faith, unity, and resilience of the Muslims would ultimately prevail. Despite these challenges, the Prophet PBUH never lost sight of his mission. He understood that Islam was not just about fighting battles, it was about establishing peace, justice, and a society based on moral principles. This understanding would be put to the test once again with the Treaty of Hudaybiyah, signed in 628 CE. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah, though initially viewed by some as a setback, was a pivotal moment in the history of Islam. The Quraysh and the Muslims agreed to a truce, with terms that allowed both sides to cease hostilities for a period of time. On the surface, the treaty may have seemed like a concession, but in reality, it was a masterstroke of diplomacy. It allowed the Muslims to establish themselves as a legitimate political entity, and it provided an opportunity for people to freely come into contact with the teachings of Islam without the pressure of war. The treaty set the stage for the eventual spread of Islam to new territories, and it proved that diplomacy, peace, and negotiation were just as powerful as military force. The conquest of Mecca in 630 CE was the final chapter in the story of the Prophet's PBUH struggle against the Quraysh. After years of tension, conflict, and negotiation, the Muslims, now stronger and more numerous, returned to Mecca, but the conquest was not one of revenge. Instead, it was one of forgiveness and reconciliation. The Prophet PBUH, upon entering the city, declared a general amnesty, forgiving the very people who had persecuted him and his followers for years. He ordered the idols in the Kaaba to be destroyed, declaring that there was no God but Allah, and that the Kaaba, once a place of idol worship, would now be dedicated to the worship of the one true God. The conquest of Mecca was a moment of profound spiritual significance. It marked the end of idol worship in the Arabian Peninsula and the triumph of the message of monotheism. But it was also a moment of mercy, forgiveness, and reconciliation. The Prophet's actions demonstrated that the true victory of Islam was not in defeating the enemy, but in winning hearts and minds through patience, compassion, and justice. As we reflect on the Medina period, we are reminded that the path of faith is not always easy. The early Muslims faced immense challenges, battle, loss, and hardship, but through it all their faith remained unwavering. The lessons of Badr, Uhud, the Trench, Hudaybiyah, and the conquest of Mecca are not just lessons of military strategy. They are lessons of patience, perseverance, diplomacy, and above all, faith in Allah's plan. In our own lives, we too face challenges and trials. The lessons of these battles and the events of this period remind us that victory is not always immediate, and the path to success is often filled with obstacles. But with faith, patience, and trust in Allah, we can overcome anything. The question is, when faced with adversity, do we stand firm in our faith as the early Muslims did? Do we trust in Allah's wisdom even when the path is unclear? As we ponder these questions, let us reflect on the lessons of the Medina period. The challenges of that time may seem distant, but the principles of perseverance, unity, and faith are as relevant today as they were then. What can we learn from the sacrifices of the early Muslims, and how can we apply those lessons to our own lives, our struggles, and our journey of faith? The final years of the Prophet Muhammad's life were filled with profound significance, not only for him personally but for the entire Muslim community. These years marked the culmination of a mission that had begun more than 2 decades earlier in the quiet solitude of the cave of Hira. The journey from the early days of persecution in Mecca to the powerful and unified Muslim community in Medina was nothing short of miraculous. Yet, as the Prophet approached the end of his earthly life, the message he had delivered, the movement he had led, and the community he had nurtured were all in a state of transition. This period was not only about consolidating power or achieving military victories. It was about embodying the core values of Islam: unity, justice, and compassion as the final testament to the mission that had begun with a single divine message. By the year 630 CE, the Prophet's influence had spread across the Arabian Peninsula. The once fragmented and hostile tribes had come together under the banner of Islam, and Mecca, the city of his birth, was now a symbol of that unity. The Quraysh, who had been bitter opponents of Islam for so long, had now embraced the faith, and the idols that once dominated the Kaaba had been destroyed. The message of Islam had triumphed not through the sword alone, but through the purity of its message, the strength of its community, and the grace of its prophet, This consolidation of power was not an end, but a new beginning for the Muslim Ummah. It was the start of a new chapter in the history of the world, a world in which social justice, human dignity, and the worship of the one true God were to be the guiding principles. But the greatest test of the Prophet's leadership was not the political victories, nor the expansion of Islam, but the task of creating a community based on the values of Islam. The Prophet had united warring tribes and individuals under a single cause. He had shown them that true power was not in worldly wealth or strength, but in the submission to the will of Allah and the commitment to justice and mercy. The lessons of unity and social justice were at the heart of his teachings, and it was these lessons that he would leave behind as his final legacy. In 632 CE, the Prophet set out for his final pilgrimage to Mecca, an event that would come to be known as the Farewell Pilgrimage. It was during this pilgrimage that the Prophet delivered his last sermon, a sermon that encapsulated the essence of his message. A message that would echo through the ages and resonate with Muslims for centuries to come. As the Prophet stood on the plain of Arafat, surrounded by over 100,000 of his followers, the weight of the moment was profound. The air was filled with a sense of reverence, awe, and anticipation. The Prophet addressed his followers, reminding them of the fundamental principles that had guided him throughout his life and that he now entrusted to them. He spoke of the unity of the Muslim Ummah, of the sacredness of life and property, of the importance of equality and justice, and of the bond of brotherhood that bound every Muslim, regardless of tribe, race, or status. His words were simple yet deeply profound. Your lives, your property, and your honor are sacred to one another like the sanctity of this day of yours, in this month of yours, in this city of yours. Remember that you will indeed meet your Lord and that he will ask you about your deeds. These words, uttered by the Prophet PBUH on the plains of Arafat, were not just a message for the Muslims of that time, but for all of humanity. They were a call to justice, compassion, and equality, principles that would form the foundation of Islamic society. The Prophet PBUH reminded his followers that all human beings were equal in the eyes of Allah, regardless of their race, status, or wealth. The only thing that distinguished one person from another was their piety and good deeds. The Prophet's PBUH words about justice and unity were especially poignant, as they came at a time when the Arab world had long been divided by tribalism and social hierarchies. Islam had already laid the groundwork for a more just and unified society, but the Prophet PBUH was now reinforcing these principles for the future. He called on the Muslim community to uphold the rights of others, to treat each other with kindness and respect, and to remember the sacred trust they held as the followers of Islam. As the sermon continued, the Prophet PBUH also spoke about the rights of women, stressing that they too were to be treated with dignity and respect. He reminded the Muslims of the importance of fulfilling their duties to their families, neighbors, and communities. And he made it clear that the core of Islam was the worship of Allah alone, and that there was no place for idol worship or division in the hearts of the faithful. The significance of this final sermon cannot be overstated. It was a clear articulation of the principles that would guide the Muslim community long after the Prophet's PBUH passing. It was a reminder that the true measure of a Muslim's life was not found in wealth or status, but in their actions, their commitment to justice, compassion, and the service of Allah. In those few moments, the Prophet PBUH had encapsulated the entire essence of his mission, providing the Muslims with a roadmap for the future. After the pilgrimage, the Prophet PBUH returned to Medina. The journey was near its end. The farewell was imminent, and the Prophet's PBUH health began to decline. Yet even as his physical strength waned, his spiritual presence remained as powerful as ever. His final days were filled with a sense of purpose and tranquility. He knew that his mission had been fulfilled, that Islam had been established, that the teachings of justice, equality, and compassion had taken root, and that the community he had built was ready to carry his legacy forward. And so, in 632 CE, after a brief illness, the Prophet Muhammad PBUH passed away. His death marked the end of an era, the end of the direct, physical presence of the one who had brought the message of Islam to the world. But his legacy would live on, carried by the hearts of his followers and the teachings he had left behind. The death of the Prophet PBUH was a moment of deep grief for the Muslim community. Those who had been blessed to walk beside him, to hear his words, and to witness his character were filled with sorrow. But even in their grief, they knew that the Prophet PBUH had entrusted them with a sacred mission. They knew that his teachings would continue to guide them, that the values of justice, compassion, and unity would remain the foundation of the Ummah. The death of the Prophet PBUH was not the end of Islam, it was the beginning of a new chapter. The Rashidun Caliphate, led by the Prophet's PBUH closest companions, would carry the message of Islam beyond the Arabian Peninsula, spreading it to new lands and cultures. But as they did so, they would carry with them the teachings of the Prophet PBA, the teachings of unity, justice, and the worship of Allah alone. As we reflect on the last years of the Prophet's life, we are reminded of the enduring lessons he imparted to us. His message of unity, justice, and compassion is as relevant today as it was over 14 centuries ago. In our own lives, we are called to embody these principles, to treat each other with dignity and respect, to uphold justice in all our actions, and to remain faithful to the teachings of Islam. The Prophet Muhammad's last sermon was a reminder that the true measure of a person's life is not found in material wealth or status, but in the strength of their character and their commitment to Allah's guidance. It was a call to action, a call to live with purpose, and a call to leave behind a legacy that would transcend generations. As we ponder the significance of the Prophet's final days, let us ask ourselves, how can we embody the values of unity, justice, and compassion in our own lives? How can we contribute to a world that reflects the teachings of Islam, just as the Prophet did during his lifetime? And how can we ensure that the legacy of the Prophet lives on in the hearts of those who follow him? The answers to these questions lie within us, and it is through our actions that we can continue the Prophet's mission and bring his message of peace and justice to the world. The death of the Prophet Muhammad in 632 CE was not just the end of an era, it was the beginning of an entirely new chapter in the history of Islam. The Prophet's passing left the Muslim community with a great responsibility to carry forward the message of Islam, to preserve the unity of the Ummah, and to ensure the proper governance of the rapidly growing Islamic State. The Prophet's close companions, who had walked beside him through the trials and triumphs of his life, now found themselves tasked with the monumental job of leading a community united in faith but diverse in its challenges. This new era was one of incredible growth, profound challenges, and a spirit of resilience. The first four caliphs, Abu Bakr, Umar, Uthman, and Ali, would become known as the Rashidun, the rightly guided caliphs. Their leadership would shape the future of the Islamic State, expanding it to unprecedented heights, while also facing internal divisions that would eventually lead to conflict. Their reigns are not merely a sequence of political events, but deeply spiritual milestones that reveal the essence of Islamic leadership, governance, and the delicate balance between unity and justice. Abu Bakr, the dawn of the Caliphate. When Abu Bakr was chosen as the first caliph, the weight of responsibility was immense. The death of the Prophet had left a profound void, and some feared that the nascent Islamic State might crumble without its leader. Abu Bakr, however, with his unwavering faith, wisdom, and deep bond with the Prophet stepped forward to lead. He understood that his role was not to replace the Prophet, but to continue his mission with humility and dedication. His first challenge was the Ridda Wars, the Wars of Apostasy. Some tribes in the Arabian Peninsula, having embraced Islam only under the Prophet's guidance, now sought to abandon the faith following the Prophet's death. Abu Bakr's response was swift and resolute. He knew that allowing these tribes to break away would weaken the Islamic community and leave it vulnerable to internal collapse. Despite facing resistance, Abu Bakr's leadership never faltered. He rallied the forces of Islam with the famous words, "If they refuse to give even a camel's share of charity, I will fight them." His leadership was marked by firmness in the face of adversity and compassion for his people. Under his rule, the unity of the Muslim community was preserved, and the foundation for the future of Islam was solidified. It was not just military success that defined Abu Bakr's reign, it was his commitment to justice and his devotion to the welfare of the people. His reign was short but pivotal, laying the groundwork for the rapid expansion of Islam that would follow in the years to come. Umar ibn al-Khattab, conquests and governance. The caliphate passed to Umar ibn al-Khattab, a man whose boldness and vision would forever change the course of history. Umar's leadership was characterized by a fierce sense of justice and a commitment to ensuring that the ideals of Islam were upheld across the growing empire. His reign saw the expansion of Islam beyond the Arabian Peninsula, stretching into Persia, Syria, and Egypt. The conquests were nothing short of remarkable, as the Muslim army, under Umar's leadership, defeated mighty empires and spread the message of Islam across vast territories. But it wasn't just the military victories that defined Umar's rule. His administration was deeply concerned with governance, social justice, and ensuring that the Islamic State adhered to the principles laid out by the Prophet Muhammad, He established a system of justice that ensured the protection of the weak and the rights of the poor. He instituted social programs to aid the needy and implemented policies that safeguarded religious and cultural freedoms for those living under Muslim rule. Yet, for all his successes, Umar's leadership was also marked by humility and a constant awareness of the weight of his role. He would often remind himself and his followers that their success was a gift from Allah, and that their duty was to ensure that the message of Islam was not diluted by power or wealth. Umar's sense of accountability before Allah is perhaps best exemplified in his famous words, "If a donkey stumbles in Iraq, I fear that I will be held accountable for it." His leadership exemplified the balance between power and piety, a balance that is crucial for any Muslim leader. Uthman ibn Affan, standardizing the Quran and the seeds of division. When Uthman ibn Affan became the third caliph, the Islamic State had reached its greatest territorial extent. However, his reign would be marked by internal strife that would challenge the unity of the Ummah. Uthman's most significant accomplishment was the standardization of the Quran. As Islam spread, different regions and communities began to recite the Quran in slightly different ways. Uthman, recognizing the importance of preserving the integrity of the holy text, ordered that all copies of the Quran be standardized into one, and that copies be sent to all corners of the Islamic Empire. This was a monumental achievement, ensuring that the Quran, the final word of Allah, would remain unchanged for future generations. However, Uthman's reign also saw the rise of discontent. Allegations of nepotism and favoritism towards his family, particularly his Umayyad clan, began to surface. As the empire expanded, the challenges of governance grew more complex, and the centralization of power in the hands of a few led to dissatisfaction among various factions. The tensions that simmered during his rule eventually culminated in his assassination, an event that would change the course of Islamic history. Uthman's death left a vacuum of leadership, and the divisions within the Muslim community began to deepen. The internal struggles that had begun under his rule would soon erupt into the first great civil war in Islam. Ali ibn Abi Talib, the first fitna and the struggle for unity. The fourth caliph, Ali ibn Abi Talib, was the Prophet's cousin and son-in-law, a man whose commitment to justice, knowledge, and faith was unparalleled. His leadership came at a time of great turmoil. Uthman's assassination had left the Muslim community deeply divided, and the question of leadership was now a source of contention. Ali's caliphate was immediately challenged by those who felt he had not done enough to bring Uthman's killers to justice. This discord soon led to the first major civil war in Islamic history, known as the Fitna. The most significant battles of this period were the Battle of the Camel and the Battle of Siffin. In the Battle of the Camel, Ali faced off against Aisha, the Prophet's widow, and other companions who had opposed his leadership. The battle, though short, was deeply emotional for the Muslim community, as it saw the companions of the Prophet fighting one another. The battle ended in a stalemate, but the divisions it caused would persist for years. The Battle of Siffin, fought against the forces of Muawiyah, the governor of Syria and a relative of Uthman, was another pivotal moment. It ended in a peaceful settlement, but it did little to heal the divisions between Ali's supporters and those of Muawiyah. The political and ideological rifts between the two sides led to the emergence of different factions, including the Kharijites, who would later become a source of further conflict. Despite the trials and tribulations of his caliphate, Ali's commitment to justice and his steadfastness in following the principles of Islam were never in question. He faced immense challenges, but his character remained a model of patience, wisdom, and humility. His leadership, though marred by internal conflict, set the stage for the eventual rise of the Umayyad dynasty. The rise of dynasties, the Umayyads, and the new era of Islam as Ali's rule ended with his assassination in 661 CE. The stage was set for the rise of the Umayyad dynasty. The caliphate, once based on the principles of unity and collective leadership, began to shift toward a hereditary monarchy. Muawiyah, the governor of Syria, who had been a key opponent of Ali, became the first Umayyad caliph, establishing a dynasty that would rule for nearly a century. The Umayyads represented a shift in the nature of Islamic leadership. The caliphate became more centralized, and political power became concentrated in the hands of a few. Despite the political changes, the Umayyad dynasty continued to expand the Islamic Empire, reaching into Spain, North Africa, and Central Asia. However, the internal divisions that had plagued the early years of the caliphate did not disappear. The rise of the Umayyads marked the beginning of a new phase in Islamic history, one that would see the growth of Islamic civilization, but also the continued challenges of maintaining unity within a rapidly expanding empire. Reflection and personal lessons. The Rashidun Caliphate was a period of extraordinary growth, both in the spiritual and temporal realms. The challenges faced by the first four caliphs were monumental, and their leadership was defined by a deep commitment to the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, PBUH. From Abu Bakr's steadfastness in preserving the unity of the Ummah to Ali's unwavering commitment to justice, each caliph's reign offers invaluable lessons in leadership, justice, and faith. For us today, their examples are a source of reflection. How do we respond to challenges in our own lives? When faced with adversity, do we stand firm in our faith as Abu Bakr did? Do we seek justice and unity as Umar did? Are we committed to preserving the core values of our faith as Uthman was in preserving the Quran? And like Ali, when we face division and conflict, do we strive for reconciliation and justice, holding fast to the principles of Islam? These are the questions we must ask ourselves as we navigate the complexities of our own lives. The lessons of the Rashidun Caliphate are timeless, and the spiritual legacy of these early leaders continues to inspire and guide us on our journey of faith. In 661 CE, the death of Ali ibn Abi Talib, the fourth and last of the rightly guided caliphs, marked the end of an era of unity and idealism in the early Islamic state. With his assassination, the Muslim community was left fractured and divided, struggling to hold onto the principles that had united them under the banner of Islam. The caliphate, once a symbol of justice, equality, and piety, now faced the rise of dynastic rule, an era that would be defined by power struggles, political ambition, and the expansion of the Islamic Empire across vast territories. This was the birth of the Umayyad Caliphate, a dynasty founded by Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan, a man whose leadership would both shape and challenge the future of Islam. Muawiyah's rise to power, his conquests, and the internal divisions that followed would forever change the trajectory of the Islamic world. The Umayyad period, spanning from 661 to 750 CE, represents a time of both extraordinary expansion and profound internal conflict. A time when Islam would stretch its borders from Spain in the west to India in the east, but also a time when the seeds of division were sown, division that would echo throughout history, leaving a lasting legacy in the hearts of Muslims across the world. Muawiyah I and the foundation of the Umayyad dynasty. Muawiyah I, a member of the powerful Umayyad clan, rose to prominence during the tumultuous period following the assassination of Uthman, the third caliph. Muawiyah had been the governor of Syria during Uthman's reign, and when Uthman was killed, Muawiyah saw an opportunity. He was not merely a political leader. He was a man with deep conviction in his ability to lead and a desire to maintain his family's influence. The tension between him and Ali led to the Battle of Siffin in 657 CE, a battle that ended in a stalemate and ultimately led to the division of the Muslim community. After Ali's death, Muawiyah declared himself caliph, claiming that the murder of Uthman had not been avenged and that the Umayyads were the rightful heirs to the caliphate. His rule would mark the beginning of the Umayyad dynasty, a dynasty that would shift the caliphate from the principle of collective leadership to a more centralized, hereditary monarchy. The Umayyad dynasty, based in Damascus, symbolized a shift in the Islamic world, a transition from the idealistic vision of the early caliphs to a more worldly, politically driven state. Muawiyah's reign was marked by political consolidation. He established a centralized government, introduced administrative reforms, and solidified the Umayyad grip on power. His leadership was pragmatic, focused on maintaining stability and expanding the empire. But with power came the inevitable challenge of maintaining unity among the rapidly growing Muslim empire. Muawiyah's rise to power was not universally accepted. It marked the beginning of the Sunni-Shia split, a division that would leave a deep scar on the Muslim community for centuries to come. Conquests and expansion. From Spain to India under the Umayyads, the Islamic Empire expanded at an unprecedented rate. From the westernmost edge of the Iberian Peninsula, modern-day Spain, to the eastern reaches of India, the Umayyads built one of the largest empires in history. These conquests were not merely military victories, they were the manifestation of the Islamic message, the spread of Islam's values of justice, equality, and monotheism across vast lands. The conquest of Spain, led by Tariq ibn Ziyad in 711 CE, was one of the most significant achievements of the Umayyad Empire. From the shores of North Africa, the Muslims crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and rapidly spread through the Iberian Peninsula. For the first time in history, Islam took root in Europe, leaving behind a legacy of intellectual exchange, architectural grandeur, and cultural transformation that would shape Spain for centuries to come. To the east, the Umayyads expanded into Persia and further into Central Asia and India. The region now known as Afghanistan and parts of modern-day Pakistan were brought into the fold of the Islamic Empire. The Umayyads faced numerous challenges during these campaigns, but their military prowess, combined with the appeal of the Islamic message, enabled them to push ever further. The Umayyad Empire was now a cross-continental power, stretching from the Atlantic Ocean to the Indus River, but with this rapid expansion came new challenges. The vastness of the empire made it difficult to govern, and the increasing diversity of the conquered peoples, different languages, cultures, and traditions meant that the Umayyad Caliphate had to find ways to manage an ever-expanding population while maintaining control. This era, though marked by triumph, was also filled with tension, as the foundations of the empire's unity began to show cracks. Internal divisions. The Sunni-Shia split. One of the most profound and lasting legacies of the Umayyad period was the deepening of the divide between the Sunni and Shia branches of Islam. The roots of this division go back to the Caliphate of Ali, but it was under the Umayyads that the split truly solidified. The Shia, the followers of Ali, believed that leadership of the Muslim community should remain within the Prophet's family, specifically with Ali and his descendants. They viewed the Umayyads as usurpers of the rightful leadership, and their opposition to Muawiyah's rise to power had deepened the rift. The Umayyads, on the other hand, believed in the legitimacy of the Caliphate's dynastic succession, which meant that leadership was a matter of political authority, not just bloodline. This division wasn't just a theological dispute, it had profound political and social implications. The Umayyads ruled with a strong hand, emphasizing the unity of the Muslim Ummah under their leadership, but their policies increasingly marginalized the Shia. The Shia, feeling oppressed and excluded, began to build their own identity, one that was distinct from the dominant Sunni tradition. The tragedy of Karbala, where the grandson of the Prophet, Hussein ibn Ali, was martyred in 680 CE, became the defining event for the Shia community, further intensifying the division. The conflict between the Sunnis and Shia during the Umayyad period set the stage for centuries of tension and political conflict, a division that persists in many parts of the Muslim world today. The decline of the Umayyads, the Abbasid revolt, and the fall of the Caliphate despite their military successes and the expansion of the Islamic Empire. The Umayyad dynasty eventually fell victim to internal corruption and external rebellion. The concentration of power in the hands of the Umayyad elites, the widespread discontent among various factions of the empire, and the oppression of non-Arab Muslims, known as Mawali, led to widespread unrest. The Abbasids, a powerful family that claimed descent from Abbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib, the Prophet's uncle, capitalized on this discontent. They built a broad coalition, appealing to both disillusioned Shia and oppressed Mawali, and waged a successful revolt against the Umayyads. In 750 CE, the Abbasids overthrew the Umayyads, bringing an end to their reign. The fall of the Umayyads marked the beginning of a new era in Islamic history, the Abbasid Caliphate, which would focus more on intellectual and cultural development than military expansion. Yet despite their fall from power, the Umayyads' legacy endured. Their architectural innovations, their contributions to Islamic governance, and the cultural exchanges fostered by their empire continued to shape the Muslim world for centuries. Reflection: the legacy of the Umayyads, the Umayyad Caliphate, was a period of both remarkable achievement and deep internal conflict. The rapid expansion of Islam, the consolidation of power under Muawiyah, and the creation of one of the largest empires in history are lasting legacies of their rule. Yet, the seeds of division, particularly the Sunni-Shia split, were sown during this period, a division that continues to shape the Muslim world to this day. As we reflect on the rise and fall of the Umayyad dynasty, we are reminded of the complexities of leadership and governance. The Umayyads were able to achieve remarkable military success and territorial expansion, yet their rule was not without its challenges. The internal divisions, the concentration of power, and the exclusion of certain groups within the empire were critical factors that led to their eventual downfall. In our own lives, we can draw lessons from the Umayyad period. How do we balance power with justice? How do we ensure that our actions align with the values of fairness, unity, and inclusivity that Islam teaches us? The Umayyads achieved great things, but they also faced the consequences of neglecting these principles. As we navigate the complexities of our own lives, may we strive for balance between ambition and humility, power and justice, unity and respect for diversity. In 750 CE, the Umayyad dynasty that had ruled the Islamic world for nearly a century came to an end, overthrown by a revolution that would shape the course of Islamic history. The Abbasid dynasty, founded by the descendants of the Prophet Muhammad's uncle Abbas, would usher in an era of unprecedented growth, prosperity, and intellectual achievement. This was a time when the Islamic world became a beacon of civilization, a center of learning and culture, and a powerful force that would influence not only the regions of the Middle East, but also Europe, India, and beyond. The Abbasid Caliphate, with its capital in Baghdad, was marked by its golden age, a period of cultural, scientific, and economic advancement that would set the stage for many of the intellectual revolutions we take for granted today. It was a time of immense intellectual curiosity, where scholars from diverse cultures and backgrounds came together to seek knowledge and contribute to a rapidly expanding pool of human understanding. Yet, as with all great empires, the rise of the Abbasids was followed by a slow and painful decline, culminating in the tragic sack of Baghdad by the Mongols in 1258 CE. The Abbasid Revolution, the rise of a new dynasty. The Abbasid Revolution was born from discontent with the Umayyad rule. Despite the Umayyads' military successes and the vast territories they conquered, their reign was marked by increasing inequality, political instability, and favoritism towards Arab elites. Non-Arab Muslims, known as Mawali, often felt marginalized and disenfranchised. They longed for a more inclusive, just leadership that would treat all Muslims equally, regardless of their ethnic or tribal origins. The Abbasid family capitalized on these sentiments. They appealed to the oppressed non-Arab Muslims and those who believed that the caliphate should be led by someone from the Prophet's extended family. With strong support from the discontented factions, the Abbasids waged a successful revolt against the Umayyads, culminating in the downfall of the dynasty and the establishment of the Abbasid Caliphate. When the Abbasids took power, they sought to create a more inclusive empire, one that embraced the diversity of the Muslim world. Unlike the Umayyads, who had ruled from a position of tribal elitism, the Abbasids envisioned an empire where governance was rooted in justice, equality, and a more universal concept of Islam. They moved the capital from Damascus to Baghdad, a city that would soon become the intellectual and cultural heart of the Islamic world. Baghdad, a center of knowledge. Baghdad, the new capital of the Abbasid Caliphate, would shine as a beacon of knowledge, attracting scholars from all corners of the world. Under the Abbasids, the city flourished not only as a political and economic hub, but also as a center of intellectual and cultural exchange. The House of Wisdom Beit al-Hikmah was established in Baghdad, a legendary center for scholars, philosophers, and scientists of diverse faiths, including Muslims, Jews, Christians, and Persians. This was a place where knowledge was not only preserved, but expanded upon. Here, scholars translated Greek, Roman, and Persian texts into Arabic, preserving ancient wisdom while adding their own discoveries and innovations. The House of Wisdom became a symbol of the Abbasid commitment to knowledge. It was here that major advancements were made in medicine, mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy, fields that would influence the course of science for centuries to come. The Abbasids embraced the belief that seeking knowledge was an integral part of being a Muslim. The Prophet Muhammad's teachings on the importance of knowledge were taken to heart, and Baghdad became a flourishing metropolis of learning. Scientific and cultural advancements during the Abbasid Golden Age, scholars in Baghdad and other Abbasid-controlled cities made extraordinary contributions to human understanding. Medicine flourished under the guidance of great scholars like Al-Razi and Ibn Sina, whose works would go on to be revered for centuries. Al-Razi's medical encyclopedia, Al-Hawi, and Ibn Sina's Canon of Medicine became foundational texts for both the Islamic world and Europe. They emphasized a holistic understanding of health and illness, integrating spiritual, physical, and environmental factors into medical practice. Mathematics and astronomy also saw incredible advancements. The famous mathematician Al-Khwarizmi, often referred to as the father of algebra, laid the foundations of modern algebra and introduced the concept of the algorithm, which would revolutionize mathematics. His work provided the groundwork for future advancements in science and engineering. In astronomy, the Abbasids built observatories and refined the astrolabe, a tool used for navigation and measuring the positions of stars. The Abbasid contribution to astronomy and navigation helped shape the development of early science in the Western world. Philosophy also experienced a renaissance under the Abbasids. Great minds like Al-Farabi, Al-Ghazali, and Ibn Rushd grappled with questions of ethics, metaphysics, and the relationship between faith and reason. Their works were influenced by Greek philosophy, especially the writings of Aristotle and Plato, but they sought to reconcile these ancient ideas with Islamic teachings. Their contributions were instrumental in preserving the philosophical traditions of the ancient world, while also shaping the intellectual landscape of the Islamic world for centuries to come. These contributions were not just intellectual, they were deeply spiritual. The pursuit of knowledge, whether it was the study of medicine, mathematics, or philosophy, was seen as a form of worship, a way to better understand the creation of Allah. The Abbasids demonstrated that science and spirituality could go hand in hand, and that the pursuit of knowledge was an integral part of the Muslim faith. The decline and fall of the Abbasid Caliphate. As the centuries passed, the Abbasid Caliphate began to face mounting internal and external challenges. The empire, once unified and prosperous, became increasingly fragmented. The central authority of the caliphate weakened, and regional governors began to assert their independence. While the Abbasid caliphs remained the nominal rulers, real power often lay with local dynasties and military leaders. One of the most significant factors contributing to the decline was the growing influence of the Turkish military slaves known as the Mamluks, who rose to prominence within the Abbasid army. These soldiers, initially brought in to serve as protectors of the caliphate, eventually seized control of the military and, by extension, the political power of the caliphate itself. The Mamluks' rise to power destabilized the central government and further divided the empire. Externally, the Abbasids faced numerous threats. The Crusaders, who arrived in the region in the 11th century, attacked and captured key cities, including Jerusalem. The Seljuk Turks, a rising power in the east, began to challenge Abbasid authority, especially in Iraq and Persia. But the greatest threat of all came from the Mongols, nomadic warriors from Central Asia who, under the leadership of Hulagu Khan, swept through the Islamic world in the 13th century. The Mongol invasion of Baghdad in 1258 was a moment of unparalleled devastation. After a prolonged siege, the Mongols breached the city's walls and laid waste to the once glorious capital. The House of Wisdom was destroyed, along with countless libraries, schools, and centers of learning. The loss of Baghdad was a symbolic and literal blow to the intellectual and cultural heart of the Islamic world. It was a moment of profound sorrow, as the wealth of knowledge accumulated over centuries was lost in a single, brutal stroke. The fall of Baghdad marked the end of the Abbasid Caliphate as a political entity, although the Abbasids continued to hold nominal power in Egypt under the Mamluks. The Islamic world had changed forever. The Mongol invasion shattered the unity of the Caliphate, and the once mighty Abbasid Empire never recovered from the blow. The rise and fall of the Abbasid Caliphate is a story of immense achievement and profound loss. The Abbasids ushered in a golden age of intellectual and cultural flourishing that left an indelible mark on human history. Their contributions to science, philosophy, and medicine shaped the development of knowledge for centuries to come. Baghdad, once the center of the world's intellectual life, stood as a symbol of the heights that human achievement could reach when guided by the principles of Islam. Yet, the fall of the Abbasid Caliphate serves as a reminder of the fragility of power and the importance of unity within the Muslim community. The internal divisions, the decline of central authority, and the eventual collapse of Baghdad show that even the most glorious empires can fall when they lose sight of the values that made them great. As we reflect on the Abbasid period, we are reminded of the importance of preserving knowledge, justice, and unity. The legacy of the Abbasids encourages us to value education and intellectual inquiry, to seek wisdom and understanding in every aspect of life, and to ensure that our communities remain united in the pursuit of justice and righteousness. In our own lives, we can draw inspiration from the Abbasids' commitment to knowledge and service to humanity. How can we contribute to the intellectual and moral growth of our societies? How can we ensure that the values of unity, justice, and faith guide us in the face of adversity? These are questions we must ask ourselves as we navigate the complexities of our own time, drawing lessons from the past to shape a better future. The period between 850 and 1453 CE was a time of great transformation and fragmentation for the Islamic world. The once unified Abbasid Caliphate, which had been the center of Islamic power and knowledge, began to disintegrate under the weight of internal conflicts, political upheaval, and external threats. In the wake of the Abbasid decline, new regional powers rose to prominence, each with its own vision for governance, culture, and religion. This period saw the emergence of diverse empires and dynasties, from the Shia Fatimids in Egypt to the Turkish Seljuks, the fierce Mamluks, and the mighty Ottomans. It was also a time of intense conflict, notably the Crusades, which marked the struggle between the Islamic world and the Christian West. These events were filled with personal sacrifice, religious zeal, and shifting power dynamics. But through it all, the resilience of the Muslim world would shine brightly, as new dynasties rose to defend the faith and carve out their place in history. This section of history is not merely a sequence of wars and conquests. It is a story of the strength of faith, the endurance of cultures, and the ultimate pursuit of unity amidst division. It is a story that speaks not only to the men and women who lived through these moments, but also to us today, as we reflect on the lessons they offer. In the midst of the Abbasid decline, a new force emerged in the West, an empire founded by the descendants of Fatima, the daughter of Prophet Muhammad, PBUH. The Fatimid Caliphate, established in 909 CE, was a Shia dynasty that rose to power in North Africa, eventually taking control of Egypt. Its rulers, claiming descent from the Prophet's PBUH own family, sought to unite the Muslim world under a different vision, one rooted in the Shia interpretation of Islam. The Fatimids established Cairo as their capital, transforming the city into a hub of political and intellectual activity. Cairo became a symbol of the Fatimids' power and influence, standing as a testament to their ability to create a prosperous, thriving state amidst a world that was fragmented and struggling. They ruled with a deep sense of religious and political conviction, seeking to establish a just and equitable society according to their understanding of Islam. But the rise of the Fatimids was not without opposition. The Sunni Abbasid Caliphate in Baghdad, the Seljuk Turks, and other factions viewed the Fatimids with suspicion, as their Shia beliefs were at odds with the Sunni majority population of the Muslim world. Tensions simmered, and the Fatimids found themselves constantly defending their authority, both from external enemies and from within. The Fatimids were also responsible for advancing knowledge, building schools and libraries, and fostering intellectual exchange. Their rule was a period of scientific and philosophical advancements. Scholars like al-Hakim and al-Mahdi contributed to the intellectual life of the empire, promoting advancements in medicine, mathematics, and astronomy. The Fatimid dynasty, with its unique blend of political authority and religious influence, would leave a profound mark on the history of Islam. However, internal divisions and the rise of new powers would eventually lead to their decline. While the Fatimids were carving out their own dynasty in North Africa, a powerful force was rising in the east. The Seljuks, a Turkish dynasty that had embraced Islam, began to exert their influence over the Islamic world. By the 11th century, the Seljuks had risen from their origins as nomadic warriors to become the protectors of the Abbasid Caliphate and the masters of vast territories, including Persia and Anatolia. The Seljuks played a critical role in the defense of the Islamic world during the Crusades. Under the leadership of Alp Arslan, they faced the Christian crusaders head-on and delivered a decisive blow at the Battle of Manzikert in 1071 CE. The victory not only halted the Crusaders' advance but also solidified the Seljuks' position as a dominant force in the Middle East. It was a moment of immense pride and spiritual significance, as the Muslim world stood united in the face of a formidable enemy. But the Seljuks were not only warriors, they were also patrons of the arts and learning. Under their rule, cities like Baghdad, Nishapur, and Isfahan flourished as centers of culture and scholarship. Scholars from all parts of the Islamic world came to study under the Seljuks, and the empire became a beacon of intellectual achievement. Yet, despite their military success and cultural contributions, the Seljuk dynasty eventually faced internal divisions, and their power began to wane. The rise of the Seljuks reminds us of the dynamic nature of leadership and the need for both military strength and intellectual development. Their triumphs, especially in the face of foreign threats, show the power of unity and faith in defending one's beliefs. Yet, their eventual fragmentation serves as a reminder that even the most powerful empires must guard against division and internal conflict. The Crusades were one of the most defining events of this period. Beginning in 1095 CE, the Crusades were a series of military campaigns launched by the Christian West against the Muslim-controlled territories of the Levant. The Crusaders sought to reclaim Jerusalem, the holy city, from Muslim rule and to spread Christianity by force. The Crusades were driven by religious fervor, political ambition, and the desire for wealth and power. For the Muslim world, the Crusades were a time of great trial and tribulation. The Crusaders, with their brutal tactics, wreaked havoc on the region, laying siege to cities, pillaging, and killing thousands. But the Crusades also brought out the best in the Muslim community. Leaders like Salah al-Din, Saladin, rose to prominence, embodying the values of justice, mercy, and courage. Saladin's victory in recapturing Jerusalem in 1187 CE became a symbol of Muslim resilience and determination in the face of overwhelming odds. The Crusades were not just a military conflict, they were a clash of civilizations. The interactions between the Islamic world and the Christian West during this period would have lasting effects on both sides. The Crusaders' eventual failure to conquer the Muslim world did not end the hostility between the two civilizations, but it did open the door for cultural exchange. Trade, ideas, and technology flowed between East and West, sowing the seeds of the Renaissance in Europe and leaving a lasting legacy in the Islamic world. The Crusades remind us of the power of belief, both as a source of motivation and as a cause of division. They show the lengths to which people will go to defend their faith, but also the destructive potential of religious conflict. The Crusaders' religious zeal was matched by the resilience of the Muslim leaders and their unwavering commitment to defending their lands and beliefs. The Mamluks were a remarkable and resilient military class that played a pivotal role in protecting the Islamic world during the 13th and 14th centuries. Initially, the Mamluks were enslaved soldiers who rose to prominence within the Islamic army, but over time, they gained political power and established their own dynasty in Egypt. In 1250 CE, the Mamluks dealt a decisive blow to the Crusaders by defeating them at the Battle of Ain Jalut. This victory was significant not just for its military achievement, but for the spiritual and emotional weight it carried. It was a moment when the Islamic world stood firm against the Crusader threat, reaffirming their strength and unity. However, the Mamluks faced an even greater challenge shortly thereafter: the Mongols. The Mongols, under the leadership of Hulagu Khan, had swept through the Islamic world, leaving destruction in their wake. In 1258 CE, they sacked Baghdad, ending the Abbasid Caliphate. Yet in 1260 CE, the Mamluks, led by Sultan Qutuz and Baybars, achieved a remarkable victory against the Mongols at Ain Jalut. This battle marked the first significant defeat of the Mongols and preserved the heart of the Islamic world from their conquest. The Mamluks' victory was a spiritual triumph, a victory for Islam, justice, and resilience. The final chapter in this period was the rise of the Ottoman Empire, a dynasty that would shape the course of history for centuries. Founded in 1299 CE, the Ottomans grew rapidly, expanding their reach across the Balkans, Anatolia, and the Middle East. The most iconic moment of the Ottoman Empire's early history came in 1453 CE, when Sultan Mehmed II, known as Mehmed the Conqueror, succeeded in capturing Constantinople. This was the moment that sealed the Ottomans' status as a global power and marked the end of the Byzantine Empire. The conquest of Constantinople was a monumental event, not just for the Ottomans, but for the Muslim world. It was a spiritual and symbolic victory, a moment of deep significance, as the city that had once been the seat of the Eastern Roman Empire, a bastion of Christianity, now fell into the hands of the Muslims. The Hagia Sophia, one of Christianity's most sacred sites, was transformed into a mosque, and Constantinople, renamed Istanbul, became the capital of the Ottoman Empire. The period between 850 and 1453 CE was one of incredible change for the Muslim world. From the rise of the Fatimids, the Seljuks, and the Mamluks to the expansion of the Ottoman Empire, it was a time of dynamic leadership, religious fervor, and military triumph. But it was also a time of division, conflict, and vulnerability. The Crusades, the Mongol invasions, and the rise of new powers within and outside the Islamic world tested the strength of the Muslim community. Through it all, the resilience of Islam remained intact, driven by the enduring belief in justice, unity, and the power of faith. As we reflect on this period, we are reminded that the strength of any community lies not in its military power or political might, but in its faith, its commitment to justice, and its ability to rise above division. The Muslim world throughout this time faced overwhelming challenges, yet it continued to thrive, adapt, and overcome. In our own lives, we too face struggles, both internal and external. How can we draw inspiration from the resilience of these dynasties? How can we maintain our unity, our faith, and our commitment to justice in the face of adversity? What lessons can we learn from this period that we can apply to our lives today? The rise and fall of empires is a reminder that history is shaped not just by the victors, but by the lessons we carry forward from the past. As we reflect on these moments, may we be inspired to build a world based on the principles of faith, justice, and unity that have been the hallmark of the Muslim world for centuries. The year 1453 CE marked a turning point not only in the history of the Islamic world, but in the history of the entire Mediterranean region. It was the year that Constantinople, the magnificent city that had stood as the heart of the Byzantine Empire for over a millennium, finally fell to the forces of the Ottomans. This event, though it may seem like a distant memory, resonates deeply with us today. Not only because it was a military triumph, but because it marked the end of one era and the beginning of another, one that would shape the course of history for centuries to come. Constantinople, with its ancient walls, bustling markets, and sacred monuments, was more than just a city. It was the gateway between the East and the West, a city that had been the center of Christianity, a symbol of Roman legacy, and a vital link between Europe and Asia. The fall of Constantinople was not just the loss of a city. It was the fall of an empire that had withstood the tides of time and the rise of a new empire. One that would become the dominant power in the Eastern Mediterranean, the Ottoman Empire. But the fall of Constantinople wasn't just a political event. It carried with it profound spiritual, cultural, and emotional significance. For the Muslims, it was a moment of immense pride and fulfillment of a prophecy that had been passed down through generations. For the Christians, it was a devastating blow, the loss of a city that was the embodiment of their religious and political identity. The emotional weight of the event was felt not only in the streets of Constantinople, but across the world. Constantinople's strategic importance. To understand the significance of the fall of Constantinople, we must first understand the strategic importance of the city itself. Located at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, Constantinople controlled the vital trade routes between the East and the West. Its position on the Bosphorus Strait, where the Mediterranean and Black Seas meet, made it one of the most coveted cities in the world. It was also the seat of the Byzantine Empire, the eastern continuation of the Roman Empire, and the stronghold of Christianity in the East. For centuries, Constantinople had been a beacon of culture, learning, and power. Its magnificent Hagia Sophia, its towering walls, and its bustling marketplaces had withstood numerous sieges, but by the 15th century, the Byzantine Empire was a shadow of its former self. It was weakened by internal strife, political fragmentation, and the relentless pressure from the rising Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans, under the leadership of Mehmed II, had been steadily encroaching on Byzantine territory for decades. The fall of Constantinople was, in many ways, inevitable, but that did not make the event any less monumental. Mehmed II's siege of Constantinople, military tactics, and the final victory, the man who would change the course of history and bring about the fall of Constantinople was Mehmed II, also known as Mehmed the Conqueror. At just 21 years old, Mehmed was a visionary leader with a fierce determination to unite the Islamic world and expand the Ottoman Empire. He was driven by a deep sense of religious duty, as well as the dream of restoring the glory of the Roman Empire under the banner of Islam. For Mehmed, the conquest of Constantinople was not just a political ambition, it was a spiritual mission, one that was prophesied by the Prophet Muhammad, PBUH, centuries earlier. Mehmed knew that capturing Constantinople would be no easy task. The city was surrounded by vast, impregnable walls, some of the most formidable defensive structures in the world. The Byzantine Empire, though weakened, had a large and well-trained army, and the city's defenders were resolute in their determination to protect their beloved capital. But Mehmed was undeterred. He brought together an army of over 100,000 men, including elite soldiers, engineers, and artillery specialists. He also brought with him some of the most advanced military technology of the time, including massive cannons capable of breaking through the city's walls. The siege of Constantinople began in April 1453. For months, the Ottomans surrounded the city, cutting off supplies and reinforcing their siege lines. Mehmed's army, though large, faced significant challenges, particularly the city's vast walls and the narrow strait that separated Constantinople from the rest of the world. But Mehmed was a strategist. He employed innovative tactics, including the construction of a massive fleet to blockade the city by sea, and he used his cannons to relentlessly pound the walls. For weeks, the city withstood the siege, but eventually the Ottoman forces breached the walls. As the Ottomans poured into the city, the defenders fought valiantly, but the tide of history had already turned. Constantinople fell on May 29, 1453. The streets, once filled with the proud citizens of the Byzantine Empire, now echoed with the sounds of Ottoman soldiers entering their long-sought prize. Maimed II's forces had triumphed, and the city that had once been the heart of Christianity was now under the control of the Muslims. The fall of Constantinople was a moment of immense emotion for both sides. For the Ottomans, it was the culmination of years of struggle, a victory that not only expanded their empire but also solidified their position as the dominant power in the Eastern Mediterranean. Maimed II, standing triumphantly in the city, must have felt a deep sense of accomplishment, knowing that he had fulfilled a prophecy and achieved something that no one before him had. But for the Christians, the fall of Constantinople was nothing short of heartbreaking. It was the loss of a city that had been their spiritual and cultural center for over 1,000 years. The impact of this loss was felt deeply by the Christian world. The loss of the city represented not just a political defeat, but a spiritual one. The Hagia Sophia, one of the most sacred Christian sites in the world, was transformed into a mosque, and the echoes of Christian prayers were replaced by the call to prayer of the muezzin. The aftermath, the creation of the Ottoman Empire, the fall of Constantinople, marked the beginning of a new era for the Islamic world. Under the leadership of Maimed II, the Ottomans solidified their control over Constantinople and transformed it into the capital of their empire, renaming it Istanbul. The Ottomans sought to build a powerful and diverse empire that would serve as a bridge between East and West, a melting pot of cultures, religions, and ideas. Maimed's victory symbolized the triumph of Islam over Christianity in the East, but it also signified a broader transformation in the Muslim world. The conquest of Constantinople ended the medieval period in Islam and ushered in a new age of power, unity, and cultural exchange. The Ottomans would go on to become one of the most powerful and enduring empires in history, stretching across 3 continents and influencing the course of world events for centuries. The Ottomans' vision for their empire was not just one of political dominance, but also one of intellectual and cultural flourishing. Maimed II, like many of the great Muslim leaders before him, understood the value of knowledge. He encouraged scholars, artists, and scientists from across the Islamic world to settle in Istanbul, creating a vibrant intellectual and cultural center that would leave a lasting legacy. Reflecting on the legacy of Constantinople's fall, the fall of Constantinople was a moment of profound spiritual and historical significance. It marked the end of the Byzantine Empire and the beginning of the Ottoman Empire's dominance in the region. But the event was more than just the shift of political power. It was a moment that signaled the transformation of the Muslim world. For the Ottomans, the conquest of Constantinople was not just a military victory, it was a spiritual one. The city, once a stronghold of Christianity, was now under the banner of Islam. The conquest of Constantinople was seen as the fulfillment of a prophecy, as the Prophet Muhammad, PBUH, had said, "You will certainly conquer Constantinople." What a wonderful leader will that leader be, and what a wonderful army will that army be. The fall of Constantinople was, for the Muslims, a moment of divine triumph, a moment of fulfillment for their faith and their destiny. But as we reflect on this event, we must also ask ourselves, what does the fall of Constantinople mean for us today? How do we respond to the challenges of our time, both personal and global? In the face of adversity, do we stand firm in our faith as the Muslims did under Maimed's leadership? And when we encounter spiritual and worldly challenges, do we trust that the fulfillment of our goals, like the Ottomans' conquest of Constantinople, will come not just through power or might, but through divine guidance, unity, and perseverance? The fall of Constantinople teaches us that every victory, whether spiritual or worldly, comes at a price. It reminds us of the importance of patience, perseverance, and faith in the face of challenges. And it calls us to reflect on our own role in the greater story of Islam, to carry forward the legacy of those who came before us and work towards a future built on justice, unity, and knowledge. The story of Islam from 570 to 1453 is not just a history of empires, dynasties, and conquests. It is the story of a people united by faith who endured hardships, rose from adversity, and shaped the course of human civilization in ways that continue to echo throughout history. From the birth of the Prophet Muhammad (PBUH) to the fall of Constantinople, this era was marked by both extraordinary triumphs and profound challenges. It was a period that saw the rise of a religion that would spread across continents, a civilization that would flourish in art, science, philosophy, and governance, and a community that would be tested by internal divisions and external threats. The growth of Islam from a small group of followers in Mecca to a global community of over 1 billion people today is a testament to the enduring strength of its message. But this journey was not one of easy victory. The Muslim world faced countless challenges: tribalism, persecution, wars, political intrigue, and the constant need for leadership and unity. Yet, in every moment of hardship, the resilience of the Islamic community shone through, driven by the values of faith, justice, and compassion that were laid down by the Prophet Muhammad, PBUH. Unity, conquest, and knowledge. One of the key themes of this period is the concept of unity. From the moment of the Prophet's PBUH first revelation, he sought to unite a fractured society under the banner of one God. The early Muslim community, though small and marginalized, was bound by a common faith and a shared purpose. They were united not by ethnicity or tribe, but by a belief in the oneness of God and the message that Muhammad, PBUH, was the final messenger. This unity was their greatest strength, and it carried them through the hardships of persecution, migration, and battle. The message of unity was not only political but spiritual. It taught Muslims that no one was superior to another, except by their piety and good deeds. The first caliphs, from Abu Bakr to Ali, worked tirelessly to maintain this unity, even in the face of division and conflict. But it was the unity of purpose, defending Islam, spreading its teachings, and adhering to its principles, that enabled the Muslim community to survive, grow, and ultimately flourish. Conquest was also a significant theme during this period. It was not just about military expansion, it was about the spread of a new way of life. The conquests under the Umayyads, the Abbasids, and the Seljuks brought Islam to new lands and peoples, from Spain to India. These conquests were not simply territorial. They were about bringing the values of justice, equality, and mercy to societies that had long been entrenched in tribal divisions, injustice, and oppression. The Islamic Caliphates introduced a new model of governance, one that emphasized fairness, the protection of the weak, and the responsibility of rulers to their people. But the growth of Islam was not only through conquest. Knowledge and cultural exchange were at the heart of Islamic civilization. The golden age of the Abbasids in particular was marked by the flourishing of science, medicine, philosophy, and the arts. Cities like Baghdad, Cordoba, and Cairo became centers of learning, where scholars from across the world came to exchange ideas and push the boundaries of human understanding. The preservation and expansion of knowledge during this period were not just intellectual achievements, they were spiritual pursuits, as the Prophet Muhammad, PBUH, himself had said. Seeking knowledge is an obligation upon every Muslim. Islamic scholars, building upon the work of the ancient Greeks, Romans, Persians, and Indians, laid the groundwork for future advancements in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and countless other fields. The contributions of scholars like Al-Razi, Ibn Sina, Al-Khwarizmi, and Al-Ghazali shaped the intellectual history of the world. Their works were later translated into Latin, influencing the European Renaissance and laying the foundation for modern science. The transition to the early modern period, the period from 570 to 1453 CE, represents the classical age of Islam, a time of great political, cultural, and intellectual achievement. However, by the 15th century, the world was changing. The fall of Constantinople in 1453 marked the end of the medieval period for both the Islamic world and the Christian West. The Ottoman Empire, which rose from the ashes of the Byzantine Empire, would continue to dominate the Eastern Mediterranean, but the rise of European powers like Spain, Portugal, and later Britain and France would shift the balance of global power. The fall of the Abbasid Caliphate and the fragmentation of the Islamic world into regional powers like the Fatimids, Seljuks, and Mamluks would give way to the new political landscape of the Ottomans, Safavids, and Moguls, shaping the modern era. Despite the challenges, Islam continued to evolve. New dynasties arose, and the principles of Islamic governance and culture were adapted to meet the needs of changing times. But even in the face of political fragmentation, the core teachings of Islam, justice, mercy, knowledge, and unity, remained a guiding light for the Muslim world. The lasting impact on global history and civilization. As we reflect on the history of Islam from 570 to 1453, we are reminded of its lasting impact on the world. The Muslim world's contributions to science, philosophy, art, and governance laid the foundation for much of the modern world. The legacy of Islamic civilization can be seen not only in the structures and institutions of the past, but also in the hearts and minds of millions of people around the world today. The message of Islam, with its emphasis on the oneness of God, justice, compassion, and the pursuit of knowledge, continues to resonate across cultures and societies. The idea that faith and reason are not opposed, that science and spirituality can coexist, remains a powerful lesson in today's world. The unity of purpose and community that Islam emphasized is just as important today, in a world divided by politics, race, and religion, as it was in the 7th century. The history of Islam is not just a record of past events, it is a living history that continues to shape the present and future. The challenges faced by the early Muslim community, the persecution, migration, conquest, and internal conflict, are not unlike the challenges we face today in our personal lives, in our communities, and in our world. How do we navigate adversity with faith and perseverance? How do we maintain unity in the face of division? How do we continue the pursuit of knowledge and justice in a world that often seems lost in ignorance and injustice? A reflective question. As we look back on the history of Islam, we are called to reflect on the lessons that have been passed down to us. The unity, the pursuit of knowledge, the compassion, and the justice that were the hallmarks of the early Muslim community are values that we can all strive to embody in our own lives. The Prophet Muhammad (PBUH) left us with a timeless message, a message that transcends time and place, that speaks to the heart of every human being, no matter their background or faith. In our own lives, how can we live out these values? How can we contribute to the legacy of Islam by seeking knowledge, acting with justice, and fostering unity in our communities? The past is not just something to study, it is a guide, a reminder, and a call to action. The history of Islam is not just a story of the past, it is a story that is still being written today, with each of us playing a part. As we reflect on this history, let us ask ourselves, how will we contribute to the ongoing story of Islam? How will we uphold its values in our own time? And how will we ensure that the lessons of the past are not forgotten, but continue to guide us as we move forward into the future?